Hey everyone. I just wanted to make a quick watch list of what I'm looking at coming into this week, kind of like I did last week, from just more macro perspective of the market. So like normal, I like to start off by looking at the earnings for the week and the econ calendar. And this is a big earnings week for a lot of companies, right? We have AMD, we have Cat, we have McDonald's, Meta, and then Thursday we have three big ones in Amazon, Apple, and Google. So it's gonna be a big week, especially for earnings. There's a lot of big companies releasing earnings this week, so I'm expecting a lot of volatility regarding that, as well as the econ calendar. Um, we have the FOMC coming up this week, and Powell speaking Wednesday afternoon, as well as jobless claims. We have consumer confidence, so we have a lot of big data coming out this week. And also it's the end of the coming up to the end of the month on Tuesday. So we're getting a monthly close on the monthly candle coming up this week of the first year. So uh expecting a lot of volatility. I'm keeping my expectations low of potentially what could happen. I don't want to try to predict what's going to happen. We just want to react to what we see. So that's what I'm looking at. Like always, I start off by gathering the expected move of the week. And just to quickly do that, I come into here on the options chain. I look on Friday's um, right here on Friday's expiration date, and I come here and look for the expected move. So it'll tell you right here, plus or minus which way. And I take that from the close price to get an idea. So like SPY, and you'll notice all for almost all tickers, the expected move is a lot higher than previous weeks. Like last week's a good example. Expected move was 723 and QQQ was 698. And this week they're both into $9. So it's $3 more each way they're projecting. Um, and same, right? So we have Apple, they have earnings, but theirs was $4. It's almost $7 this week. So those are things I'm watching. And with a higher expected move, right, it creates more volatility, and potential a bigger move in a direction and possibly seeing a trend. So keeping an eye on that. So start offing with SPY. Let me go to the daily. So we broke above 400 pretty nicely. We came up to almost about 408 this week. So I'm looking at this closer to about 402 area to hold as a base, as the new floor, down to 400. That's the area I'm looking to hold, um, and pushing up potentially into this 410 area. We have tested this area a few times now. So the more we test, right, the weaker and weaker resistance becomes. So we could potentially break above 410 into 415 and then potentially fill in this gap into 420, right? And with the expected move, that's not unreasonable. The first standard deviation is 415, or down to 396, and the second one is a potentially up to 428, 24. So to the upside, that's what I'm watching: 410, 415, and then 420. And then if we hold above this 402, 401, 400 area. Now, if we break below, I'm going to be watching 395, uh, and then potentially down to 390 to 387 area, as potential, right? So we'd be entering back down into this base that we created. We haven't created a higher high yet, right? Above 410 would be a higher high. So we're still sitting right in between that. Looking at QQQ has a lot of earnings this week, being the tech ETF. So this can be a lot more volatile, right? Looking at the expected move, it has a $9 expected move as well. We did break above this 390 area, and hold. So that is going to be the base, as the floor I'm looking for here. And then pushing up potentially into this. We're right above here right now. But this little bit like 398 is resistance to 300. Pushing above 300, we can enter this gap really quickly. 302 to almost 310. So that's what I'm looking at. If we do come down to the downside, I'll be looking at this 280 area right here as support. So same on IWM here. I already highlighted this, but on here, but we still haven't broke this 190 area, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. We could see a bounce off like this 387 area potentially, and then push above this 390. We have tested this a lot of times, 388.9 to 390 area, so we could see a push into this. Breaking into this 395 area would be the next area of resistance, potentially up to this 200 area. If we lose this 287 area, I would see us coming down to this little below like 283-ish, 284, and then down to this, I mean 180 area. So those are the areas I'm looking for on IWM. Or I think I said twos, but it's the 100s. We do have a sneaky little gap down here potentially to fill. And then I'm gonna go over a couple tickers that I'm keeping an eye on for the week. Starting with Apple. Apple does have earnings, so I personally won't be trading it, but I will be keeping an eye on it. Apple's is a huge indicator of the whole market and can potentially move the whole market. So everybody should be keeping an eye on what happens with earnings and this week. We broke above 140, so I'm keeping an eye on that. That is the new support area, 140, 142. And then resistance, we're sitting right above 145, which is another key area. And then up into this 150, 152, 153 area would be resistance areas. I'm keeping an eye on that. If we do lose 140, I'm going to be watching this. Where's it about 137.50 and then down to this 133, 134. So those are the next areas of support to the downside. But we did enter this new little base right here. So kind of keeping an eye on to see if we hold into this base or we break above it or we break back down into this other one. Amazon is another stock that I'll be keeping an eye on. They do also have earnings as well, but it's another big mover and indicator of the market. So I want to keep an eye on what's happening with that. We did break out of this little base. I kind of talked about this last week of holding above this $90 and potentially 93, and we did. And then we broke out, and we broke out nicely. We broke past 100. So I'm looking at the same thing here. This $98 area is support, pushing up into this potential gap about 104. We could fill this gap, and we have resistance up here around 106, 107, and then to 110. That would be the gap. To the downside, if we lose this 98 area, 95 will be support, and then 93, and then we could fill this gap at to 90. So that's going to be watching. But they do have earnings, so it could be volatile and it could be a big move potentially. Next, I'm going to keep an eye on Bank of America. On the weekly, kind of see the potential head and shoulders forming here. They do have a little gap right here. And this area has been a big support or resistance for them. I can actually zoom out a little bit. Right, we could see this. So it's about this 36.50 to 37 area. So I'm going to be watching that, and it kind of lines up perfectly to right after we fill this gap. So that's kind of what I'm going to be watching for here. If we reach up to this area, we have support a little bit below 35 and then down to 33. And the resistance would be this, where I potentially see a head and shoulders. If we do break above, we could see 38 to 40. So those are a couple of things I'm watching, but mainly for this. Next, we have Microsoft. Same here. Microsoft had earnings last week, and we broke above this 240. So that's going to be kind of my floor on Microsoft that I'm keeping an eye on here. And we have a lot of gaps to the upside. So, depending on what's going on with FOMC as well as other earnings, we could see a push up into filling a lot of these gaps above this 250, potentially this 260 area, 263. And then on the downside, right, we have 134, 135 as support, and then 130. Netflix, I think Netflix interests me this week. We filled this big gap that we had here. And we're kind of just grinding up into all these different areas and creating a couple of gaps to the downside. And we're approaching a big area, right? We're at 360. And we can actually look at Netflix. So Netflix has a $16 expected move and a $12 a day ATR. So we could see into the 390s to 328 area potentially if we're looking at the 2 standard deviations for that. So potential big moves. And it's one of the like in here, it's the only red stock on Friday compared to the others. So could potentially show some weakness, low volume in the last couple of days. So pushing up here, we do have this little gap. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. And then to this 390 area, 392 is a big resistance area right here. The big thing I'm watching too here is this 355 area was acted as a bigger support before. And then once we got below, right, we couldn't hold it, get above it, and then we dumped. And this was earnings too. So, but same here. If we even look, if we go to a smaller time frame, maybe we'll go to a 4 hour. Right, we can see the nice bounce off this 355 area. So I'm gonna be looking for that to hold if and push up. If not, we could look for potential downside to this 335 area right about here. 332, 334, and then potentially into these gaps. Right, so looking at that, there's a potential big move that could happen here to the upside or downside for Netflix. The next one I'm keeping an eye on for the week is Walmart. I see Walmart in a couple ways. You could say it's in a little channel right here. And then if we just draw a trend line from the bottom, we bounce off support, right? So I'm keeping an eye on this. Now, the big areas I think here are this 138 area, about right here. And then 140 is kind of the new support right now. And then for resistance, right, we could look at potential rejects, which would be the top of this channel at this about 145.50 area, 145, 144. So we could see potential rejects up here. We can use this as support. So I see being able to look at this both ways and playing. I am ignoring this other candle going in just because this is the day all the stocks got halted, and I'm not going to use that as far as my trend lines. And then looking at it on a smaller time frame, you can see that, right, we'd be reaching this base and we can reject into this 145 area, just right like we did over here was 148, 144.80. So it's kind of what I'm watching this week. And kind of like I mentioned, I'm keeping my expectations low going into the week and just kind of let everything flow and react to the market. So let's have a good week.